My father always said there are two types of people in the world, those who build things and those who decorate them. He, Harold, was a builder, a civil engineer who saw beauty in rebar and blueprints, a man whose hands were perpetually calloused from a life of making things that last. I, his daughter Brooke, followed in his footsteps, finding a quiet satisfaction in the orderly, logical world of city planning and zoning. My career was my foundation, built on rules and regulations, a fortress of predictability in a messy world. Then there was my stepmother, Diane, and her daughter, Megan. They were the decorators. They didn't build, they embellished. They didn't create, they curated. And after my father passed, they were set to inherit the most important thing he ever built, our family home. So if you've ever felt like the odd one out in your own family, the one who does the work while someone else gets the credit, then you need to hear this story. If you've ever been told you're too quiet, too serious, too boring, while the loud, flashy people get everything handed to them, then settle in. Because this is the story of how I used my boring career to protect my father's legacy from the very people who claim to love him most. It's a story about a dusty old box, a forgotten piece of paper, and the quiet revenge of a woman who was finally pushed too far. And it all started in the cold, mahogany-paneled office of a lawyer who looked at me with a mixture of pity and dismissal. The air in Mr. Gabol's office was thick with the scent of old paper and furniture polish, a smell I usually found comforting, but that day it felt suffocating. It was the day of the will reading, just a week after we had buried my father. I sat on a stiff leather chair that was clearly designed for discomfort, my hands clasped in my lap. Across from me, my stepsister Megan was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving in a quick, agitated rhythm. Her grief was performative, a well-rehearsed production for her online followers. She'd already posted a 7-part story about navigating loss with authenticity, complete with a black and white photo of her holding my father's hand, a photo I knew for a fact was taken 2 years ago at a birthday party. Beside her, her mother Diane, my stepmother of 20 years, was dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, her expression one of profound, practiced sorrow. I felt like an intruder in my own family's grief. My sorrow was a quiet, heavy thing, a stone in my gut. It wasn't photogenic. It didn't fit into a tidy narrative for public consumption. I had spent the last year of my father's life coordinating his care, managing the endless stream of appointments and medications, the thankless, invisible labor of dying. Diane and Megan had been there for the dramatic moments, the photo opportunities. Mr. Gabol cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He adjusted his glasses and picked up the document on his desk. As you know, he began, his voice a somber drone. Harold was a man of simple tastes but clear intentions. He amended his will a final time 6 months ago. I felt a slight tightening in my chest. I hadn't known that. He continued, skipping over the usual legal preamble and getting to the heart of it. To my stepdaughter Megan, a girl who brought so much light and vibrancy into my life, I leave the property at 427 Chestnut Lane and all its contents, in the hopes that she will fill it with as much life as she has brought to our family. Megan let out a theatrical gasp, her phone clattering onto the table. She looked at Diane, her eyes wide. The house. The whole house? Diane reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand, a genuine triumphant smile breaking through her mask of grief. Oh honey, he loved you so much. He knew you'd make it a beautiful home. I just sat there, frozen. 427 Chestnut Lane wasn't just a property. It was the house my father had built with my mother, my real mother, who passed when I was 10. It was where I grew up, where every wall held a memory, every creaky floorboard sang a familiar song. Megan, who had only lived there for a few years before moving out to pursue her brand, had already been talking about her plans. She wasn't going to make it a home. She was going to turn it into a content house, a gaudy pastel-painted backdrop for her vapid online life, a place she and her influencer friends could use to film sponsored posts and dance challenges. The Vibe Villa, she called it. The thought was a physical violation, a graffiti tag on a sacred monument. Mr. Gabol looked at me over the top of his glasses. his expression softening into that infuriating look of professional sympathy. And to my daughter Brooke, I held my breath. A part of me, a small, foolish part, still hoped. Maybe there was a trust, a fund, something that acknowledged my role, my place as his actual daughter. He leaves the contents of the box from his old office, currently stored in the attic. He specified it contained his collection of old city plans and historical documents, which he knew you, with your unique interests, would appreciate. A box. He left me a dusty box of old papers. The silence that followed was heavier than the grief. It was thick with their victory and my humiliation. Megan was trying to look sympathetic, but her eyes were dancing with excitement. Diane, however, made no such effort. She turned to me, her voice dripping with a syrupy, false pity that was sharper than any blade. "Well, Brooke," she said, patting my arm with a hand that felt cold and reptilian. "The box of old papers. Oh, I suppose it's a fitting tribute to your boring career." And there it was. Had a dismissal. The casual, cruel summary of my entire life, my entire relationship with my father. Just a box of trash. Teen boring. That was their word for me. I was the responsible one, the stable one, the one who paid her bills and didn't cause drama. To them, that was boring, predictable, unworthy of the grand prize. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, my throat too tight to form words. I stood up, shook Mr. Gable's hand without meeting his eyes, and walked out of the office, the sound of Megan's excited whispering about paint swatches and ring lights following me down the hall. As I stepped out into the bright, indifferent sunshine, the weight of it all finally crashed down. It wasn't about the house. Not really. It wasn't about the money. It was about the meaning. My father, the man who taught me how to read a blueprint, the man who celebrated when I passed my zoning certification exam, had co-signed their narrative. In the end, he had chosen the decorator over the builder. He had left his legacy to the person who would tear it down, and I, the one who understood its foundation, was left with a box of his scraps. Diane's words echoed in my head, a fitting tribute to your boring career. And in that moment, a quiet, cold little switch flipped in my heart. Something I hadn't felt before. It wasn't grief anymore. It was resolve. They thought I was boring. They were about to find out that boring people are the ones who read the fine print. The drive home was a blur. The city I spent my days meticulously organizing, with its grids and zones and ordinances, felt chaotic and hostile. Every traffic light seemed to mock me. Every building felt like a testament to a life more significant than mine. I carried the box up to my small, neat apartment. It was heavier than I expected, both physically and emotionally. It smelled of dust and time, and my father's pipe tobacco, a scent that sucker punched me with a wave of raw grief. I set it down in the middle of my living room, where it sat like a tombstone. For 3 days I circled it. I went to work, filled out permits, reviewed site plans, and answered questions about setback requirements, all on autopilot. My colleagues offered their condolences, their faces a mix of pity and discomfort. My boss, a kind man named Frank, told me to take all the time I needed, but I couldn't. To stop moving was to let the reality of the situation sink in, and I wasn't ready for that. At night, I'd come home and stare at the box. It represented the final, definitive statement on my place in my own family, an afterthought. Diane's words, a fitting tribute to your boring career, played on a loop in my mind. Boring. Was I boring? I had a good job, a master's degree in urban planning. I owned my apartment. I had a retirement account. I contributed to society in a tangible if unglamorous way. By any reasonable measure, I was a success. But in the distorted reality of my family, success was measured in follower counts and brand deals. Megan, who had dropped out of 2 different colleges and currently made a living by unboxing cheap clothes on the internet, was the star. She was vibrant. I was stable. And in their dictionary, stable was just another word for boring. It had always been this way. I closed my eyes, and the memories, sharp and painful, flooded in. I was 17 again, sitting at the kitchen table, an acceptance letter clutched in my hand. It was a full scholarship to the state university's planning program, one of the best in the country. I was ecstatic. I showed it to my father, and he'd given me a proud, solid hug. But then Diane and Megan came in. Megan, who was a year younger, had just gotten a new convertible for her 16th birthday. Diane glanced at my letter. Urban planning, she'd said, her nose wrinkling slightly. What will you do with that, dear? Draw maps. A few months later, when Megan got into a private party school 1,000 miles away to major in communications, a degree she never finished, Diane threw a massive party, crowing to all her friends about Megan's ambition. My full scholarship was never mentioned again. The message was clear. My practical ambition was quaint, but Megan's frivolous ambition was celebrated. Then another memory surfaced, more recent, more raw. My father, frail and thin in his hospital bed, just a few months before he passed. I was there, as I was every Tuesday and Thursday, with a folder full of his medical bills and insurance forms, trying to make sense of the bureaucratic nightmare. I was talking to a nurse about his medication schedule when Megan swept in, a cloud of expensive perfume and frantic energy. She didn't ask about the doctor's report. She didn't offer to help with the paperwork. She pulled out her phone, arranged my father's blanket just so, and posed beside him, her face a mask of sorrowful beauty. Just want to capture this moment, she'd whispered, snapping a dozen selfies for the memories. Later that day, a post appeared on her Instagram, feeling so heartbroken but so blessed to be by my dad's side during this difficult time. Family is everything. #brave #cancer sucks. The post got thousands of likes and hundreds of comments praising her strength. I was just the anonymous figure in the background, the one dealing with the ugly, boring reality of it all. It wasn't about being there for him. It was about being seen being there for him. And the house. My mind drifted back to a sunny Saturday when I was 9, before Diane, before the family fractured. My father and I were in the backyard, planting a maple tree. He let me dig the hole, my small hands struggling with the shovel. He told me that building something, planting something, was an act of faith. You put this in the ground, Brooke, he'd said, his voice full of a gentle certainty, and you trust that it will grow. You trust that it will be here long after you are. That's legacy. That maple tree was huge now, its branches shading the back porch where we used to sit. The thought of Megan taking a chainsaw to it to make room for a hot tub for her vibe villa made me feel physically ill. This pattern of being the overlooked provider, the family scapegoat, was a well-worn groove in my life. I'd paid for Megan's car repairs when she couldn't afford them. I'd co-signed for her first apartment. I'd helped Diane with her taxes every year, a task she found dreadfully tedious. I did it because I loved my father, and keeping the peace was my way of showing it. I absorbed the slights, swallowed the insults, and told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that my father saw it, that he knew. But his will felt like a posthumous slap in the face. It was the ultimate validation of their worldview. In the end, he had rewarded the noise and dismissed the silence. The catalyst came on the 4th day. My phone rang, and it was Megan. I almost didn't answer, but the habit of being the responsible one was too deeply ingrained. "Brooke," she said, her voice bright and businesslike. "Hey, so listen, I'm having some of the girls over this weekend to start planning the Vibe Villa renovations. It's going to be epic. Anyway, that box of Dad's junk is still in the attic, and I need it gone. Like, by Friday. The contractor needs to get up there to look at the insulation. Junk." She called it junk. The last thing my father had left me. The thing he had specifically, personally, willed to me. "It's not junk, Megan," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Brooke, don't be so dramatic. It's a box of dusty old papers. What are you going to do with it? Frame it. Just come get it. I'm trying to create a whole new energy in the house, you know. Out with the old, in with the new. Out with the old." She meant my father. She meant my mother. She meant me. Something inside me, something that had been tightly coiled for years, finally snapped. It wasn't a loud, explosive break, but a quiet, clean one. The emotional tether that had bound me to their approval, their validation, was severed. "You know what, Megan?" I said, my voice steady and cold. "You're right. It is time to get it out of the house. I'll be there this evening." I hung up before she could reply. I walked over to the box, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with grief, but with a strange, unfamiliar surge of adrenaline. I knelt down and slit the packing tape with my house key. The flaps fell open, releasing another puff of that dusty, bittersweet smell. Inside, it looked exactly like what Diane had called it: trash. Piles of rolled-up blueprints, yellowed and brittle, stacks of municipal reports from the 50s and 60s, folders filled with correspondence on faded letterhead. It was my father's professional life in a cardboard coffin. I started to lift the papers out, my movements careful, almost reverent. For the first hour, it was just that, a sad, nostalgic journey through my father's past projects. A bridge downtown, a suburban subdivision, the city's first modern water treatment plant. And then I saw it. It was in a simple manila folder, tucked at the very bottom, beneath a thick roll of electrical schematics. The folder was labeled in my father's neat, angular handwriting: 427, Chestnut, variance 1952. My breath caught in my throat. I was a zoning officer. I knew what a variance was. It was a deviation from the rules, an exception granted under special circumstances. I opened the folder. Inside was a single, carbon copy document, the type so thin you could almost see through it. The letterhead was from the City Planning Commission, dated October 17, 1952. It was an official, stamped and notarized zoning variance. My grandfather, it seemed, had run a small clock repair business out of the house's ground floor before my father built the new structure on the old foundation. To make it legal, he had applied for and been granted a commercial use variance. The document clearly stated that the property at 427 Chestnut Lane, despite being in a residential area, was grandfathered in and permanently zoned for C1 use. Limited commercial. My mind started to spin, the gears of my boring career clicking into place with terrifying speed. Residential zones, especially in historic districts like Chestnut Lane, were protected. You couldn't just open a business. But commercial zones were different. Property taxes were exponentially higher. You were subject to different regulations, different building codes, different signage laws, and most importantly, you could sell the property to a commercial entity. I leaned back on my heels, the flimsy piece of paper shaking in my hand. My father had been a builder, a man of details. He never threw anything important away. Did he know this was in here? Did he forget, or did he leave it for me on purpose? Was this his final coded message? "You're the builder, Brooke. You know what to do with the plans." A slow, cold smile spread across my face.
It felt foreign.
Megan wanted to create a whole new energy in the house.
Head, fine.
I was about to introduce an energy she couldn't possibly have imagined. It wasn't about revenge.
Heads, not yet.
It was about preservation.
Heads, nine Ned.
It was about preservation.
Heads, nine Ned.
It was about preservation. About protecting my father's legacy from being turned into a monument to cheap glitter and fleeting fame.
Heads, nine Ned.
It was about preservation. About the eternity and my lap.
Heads, nine Ned.
The line between preservation and revenge was starting to get very, very blurry.
Heads, nine Ned.
The line between preservation and revenge was starting to get very, very blurry. The next morning, I walked into my office feeling like a different person. The familiar gray cubicles and the low hum of the HVAC system, usually just the backdrop of my life, now felt like the command center for a covert operation. The dusty document was tucked safely in my briefcase, a secret weapon hiding in plain sight.
Heads, nine Ned.
Which was usually occupied with fire code compliance and lot line disputes, was now a whirlwind of possibilities. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a crystalline, almost giddy clarity. I knew the variance was a powerful tool, but I needed to understand the full extent of its power. This was my world. This was what I was good at. While Megan was researching selfie lighting, I was about to conduct a masterclass in due diligence. My first stop was Alex's cubicle. Alex was my closest friend at the office, a cynical, sharp-witted land use analyst who had a healthy disdain for bureaucracy and an even healthier appreciation for karmic justice. He had listened to me vent about Diane and Megan for years. "Morning, Brooke," he said without looking up from a topographical map. "Surprised to see you. Thought you'd be taking more time. I have a hypothetical for you," I said, pulling up a chair. I kept my voice low, even though no one was paying attention to us. Alex finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. "I love hypotheticals. They're so much more interesting than actual permit applications for she sheds." I took a deep breath. "Hypothetically, let's say there's a property, single-family home in an R1 historic district. Let's say, hypothetically, someone finds an original, notarized zoning variance from 1952, grandfathering the property for C1 commercial use, a variance that was never rescinded and is still attached to the parcel's legal description in the deep archives." Alex leaned forward, his interest piqued. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "That's not a hypothetical, that's a unicorn. Those things almost never survive without being challenged or extinguished during a plat revision. But if it's legit, what about it?" "Hypothetically," I continued, my heart starting to beat a little faster, "what could the owner of that property do?" "Well," he said, tapping a pen on his desk, "they could continue to use it as a residence, obviously, but they'd be foolish. The second the city's tax assessor gets wind of its true commercial zoning, the property taxes would go through the roof. We're talking a 5 or 6-fold increase. It stops being a house and starts being a massive financial liability." A cold thrill went through me. I hadn't even considered the tax implications. But more importantly, Alex went on, a slow grin spreading across his face. "They could sell it, not to a family, but to a business. And in an R1 historic district, a commercially zoned parcel is more than a unicorn. It's the holy grail, especially on a desirable block. Developers would kill for it." "What about the historic designation?" I asked. "Wouldn't that protect the house itself?" "Protect it from what? Bad taste?" "Sure. The historic committee would have a fit if someone tried to paint a Victorian home neon pink." My mind flashed to Megan's plans for the Vibe Villa. They can control exterior modifications to preserve the character of the neighborhood, but they can't stop a legal sale, and they can't stop a new owner, especially a deep-pocketed corporate one, from arguing that the existing structure is unsalvageable or not compliant with commercial code and needs to be demolished for a new, contextually appropriate build. He made air quotes with his fingers. "It's a long, expensive fight, but a big corporation with a team of lawyers almost always wins." Every word out of his mouth was another nail in the Vibe Villa's coffin. It was better, more complete, than anything I could have dreamed of. "Alex," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "it's not a hypothetical." I opened my briefcase and slid the manila folder across the desk. He opened it, read the document, and then read it again. He let out a low whistle. "Holy, Brooke, this is a nuke." He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "This is the house, isn't it? Your dad's house." I just nodded. "The one your influencer stepsister is about to turn into a monument to bad taste." I nodded again. He leaned back in his chair, a look of profound respect on his face. "Your stepmother called your career boring, didn't she?" He started to laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that made heads pop up over the cubicle walls. "Oh, this is beautiful. This is poetic justice on a level I've only read about in novels." For the next 2 hours, Alex and I were a 2-person special ops team. We dove into the city's digital archives. First, we pulled the current zoning map for Chestnut Lane, a sea of light green, R1 residential, with one tiny, beautiful exception. Parcel 47B, 427 Chestnut Lane, was still colored blue. C1 commercial. It had been overlooked for 70 years, a ghost in the machine that no one had ever noticed because no one had ever had a reason to look. The system had worked perfectly by failing completely. Then we dug into the property tax records. As a residence, it was assessed at a value based on comparable homes in the area. If reassessed as a commercial property, Alex's estimate was dead on. The annual tax bill would jump from around $8,000 to nearly $50,000. Megan and Diane would be financially crippled within a year. They couldn't afford to keep it, even if they wanted to. The final piece of the puzzle was the most delicious. "You know who's been trying to get a foothold on that block for a decade, right?" Alex asked, spinning his chair to face his computer. "Who?" He typed a few words into a search engine. "The Daily Grind," he said, pointing to the screen. Of course, the ubiquitous, hyper-aggressive coffee shop chain. They were like a force of nature, colonizing every desirable street corner in the city. Their corporate branding was the antithesis of everything the Chestnut Lane Historic District stood for. The Residents Association had fought them off 3 times, denying their proposals to tear down other, less significant buildings on the periphery of the district. They were desperate, and we both knew their head of real estate acquisition for this region, a slick, relentless operator named Marcus Thorne. I dealt with him on a few projects. He was a shark who smelled blood in the water from a mile away. They'd pay a fortune for that lot. Alex breathed, his eyes gleaming. They could put a flagship store there, a drive-through. It would be the ultimate middle finger to the historic society that's been stonewalling them. It was all there, a perfect, self-contained system of destruction. I didn't have to be the villain. I didn't have to make threats or demands. All I had to do was introduce one piece of information into the ecosystem and watch the natural order of things take its course. The avarice of a corporation, the short-sightedness of my family, the unbending logic of municipal code. They would do all the work for me. I made a high-quality, digitally scanned copy of the variance. Then I made a few physical photocopies. I put the original document back in its folder and placed it in the fireproof safe in my office. It was too valuable to ever let out of my sight again. The plan was simple. It was elegant. It was deniable. Marcus Thorne and I were both members of the Regional Association of Urban Developers. They had a monthly networking luncheon. The next one was in 2 days. I knew he'd be there. I would just happen to sit at his table. I would just happen to have a folder of unrelated public documents he had previously requested for another project, and a copy of the variance might just happen to get stuck to the back of one of them. A stray piece of paper, a clerical error, an accident. It was no longer about preservation. That was the justification I'd told myself in the beginning, the noble excuse. But now, sitting there with Alex, mapping out the downfall of my family, with the cold precision of a military strategist, I had to be honest with myself. This was about revenge. It was about the smug look on Megan's face, the cutting dismissal in Diane's voice. It was for every time I was made to feel small, responsible, and worst of all, boring. They had built their world on a foundation of feelings and appearances. I was about to demolish it with a foundation of facts. They had underestimated me my entire life. They saw a quiet city planner. They never once thought to look at the blueprints. The day of the networking luncheon, I chose my outfit with the care of a soldier preparing for battle. A simple, professional gray suit. Understated, invisible, boring. It was the perfect camouflage. In my briefcase, I had a folder for Marcus Thorne containing the public access traffic flow reports he'd wanted for a development on the other side of town, and clinging to the back of the last page, held by a single strategically weak piece of static electricity, was a crisp photocopy of the 1952 zoning variance. The hotel ballroom was buzzing with the low roar of 100 conversations. Developers, architects, real estate agents, and city officials all mingling and making deals. I spotted Marcus holding court near the buffet, a circle of people laughing at something he said. He was exactly as I remembered: expensive suit, perfect teeth, and the predatory stillness of a reptile. I got my plate of inexplicably dry chicken cordon bleu and made my way to his table, feigning a slight surprise at seeing him. "Marcus, good to see you," I said, my voice pitched at a perfect neutral tone. "Brooke, how are you?" he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He remembered me, but only in the vague way you remember a useful tool. "Doing okay," I said, allowing a flicker of sadness to cross my face. It's been a tough few weeks. My father, Harold, passed away. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, he said, the sympathy automatic and hollow. He was a great engineer, a real old-school guy. Thank you. He was, I said. The estate stuff is a bit of a nightmare, as you can imagine. I took a bite of chicken. He left the old family house to my stepsister. I let out a small, weary sigh. It's on Chestnut Lane. I saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. He knew the block. Ah, Chestnut. Beautiful street. The commission is tough as nails over there, though. Impossible to build anything new. Tell me about it, I said with a small wry laugh. It's a beautiful old house, but the paperwork is a mess. I've been sorting through his old office files. So much strange, ancient stuff. You wouldn't believe it. I was laying a breadcrumb trail, and he was following it perfectly. We chatted for a few more minutes about irrelevant city business. Then, as people started to get up for the keynote speaker, I reached into my briefcase. Oh, Marcus, before I forget, here are those traffic reports you wanted. I handed him the folder. Let me know if you need anything else. Great, thanks, Brooke. Appreciate it, he said, taking the folder without looking at it, and placing it in his own leather satchel. I watched him walk away, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The bait was in the water. Now all I had to do was wait for the shark to bite. I didn't have to wait long. 48 hours later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a corporate-looking exchange. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message popped up. It was from a paralegal at a major downtown law firm. The one I knew, the Daily Grind, kept on a multi-million-dollar retainer. She said they had a matter of some urgency to discuss, regarding a property at 427 Chestnut Lane. I smiled. The hook was set. I deleted the message. The real explosion came the following evening. I was at home reading a book when my phone erupted with an incoming call from Diane. I looked at the screen, took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, and let it ring, and ring, and ring. She immediately called back. I ignored it again. A string of frantic texts followed. Brooke, call me right now. This is an emergency. What did you do? A lawyer called. A lawyer. They want to buy the house. Some coffee company. They said it's zoned commercial. That's insane. You have to fix this. I read the texts, a feeling of cold, clean satisfaction washing over me. You have to fix this. For my entire life, that had been my role. Fix Megan's car. Fix Diane's taxes. Fix the family's problems. I was the fixer, and they were right. I was going to fix this, but not in the way they imagined. I typed back a single, simple reply. Sorry, busy. What lawyer? This, I knew, would drive them insane. The pretense of ignorance was 1,000 times more infuriating than an open declaration of war. Diane's reply was a long, rambling block of text, riddled with typos and panic. She explained that a man named Mr. Carmichael had called on behalf of the Daily Grind, making a formal, all-cash offer for the house. The offer was astronomical, nearly double the residential market value. But he'd also mentioned that if they didn't accept, his client was prepared to explore all legal avenues to develop the commercially zoned parcel they had been seeking for a decade. He had apparently sent them a courtesy copy of an old zoning document as an attachment. Diane's text ended with, "This has to be some kind of mistake. Harold would never have wanted this. You work for the city. You have to call them and tell them their records are wrong. This is your fault. My fault." Of course it was. In their world, anything that went wrong was by definition my fault. I was the scapegoat, the designated bearer of all blame. For a moment, the old guilt reflex kicked in, a phantom limb of my former self. But then I looked at the box of my father's plans, which I had neatly stacked on a bookshelf, a fitting tribute to your boring career. The phantom pain vanished, replaced by icy resolve. I didn't reply to her text. Instead, I put my phone on silent and went to bed. I slept more soundly than I had in years. The next day, Megan took to social media. She posted a tearful black and white video from the front porch of the house. "I don't know who to trust anymore," she sobbed into her phone's camera, mascara running down her cheeks in perfect, photogenic streaks. "We are just trying to grieve, to honor my father's memory by creating a place of joy and light. She paused for a dramatic sniffle. And now these corporate vultures are trying to bully us, trying to tear down my family's legacy. They're using these fake documents and legal threats to try and steal our home. Please, if you're watching this, send us your prayers and good vibes. We need them now more than ever. #save Chestnut House #family over profit. It was a masterpiece of manipulative performance art. But for the first time, her audience didn't swallow it whole. The comments section, usually a fawning echo chamber of support, was a mixed bag. So sorry you're going through this. Stay strong, Megan. But then, others started to trickle in. Wait, what fake documents? Is the house really zoned commercial? If so, that's a huge deal. My uncle is a real estate lawyer. He said a grandfathered variance is like a golden ticket. Why are you crying about this? You just won the lottery. Hang on. Didn't you say you were turning this into a content house for your friends? Doesn't sound like a family legacies to me. The narrative was slipping from her grasp. Her attempt to frame herself as the victim was backfiring because the tragedy she was describing sounded an awful lot like a massive financial windfall to any normal person. Her carefully curated world of illusion was crashing against the hard, ugly wall of reality. Her influencer friends, the ones who were supposed to be the inaugural residents of the Vibe Villa, started to quietly back away. The bad vibes of a potential legal battle and the public questioning of Megan's story were not good for their brands. One by one, the promised collaborators pulled out, offering flimsy excuses. The Vibe Villa was dead before the first can of pastel paint had even been opened. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Brooke, it's Diane." Her voice was completely different. The frantic rage was gone, replaced by a strange, syrupy sweetness. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. It set my teeth on edge. "Hello, Diane," I said, my tone flat. "Honey, I am so sorry about that text last night. I was just so panicked. You know how I get. This has all been such a shock," she cooed. "Megan is an absolute wreck. This was her dream, you know, to honor Harold." I remained silent. "Listen," she continued, her voice dropping into a confidential whisper. We've been so unfair to you, Brooke. In the chaos of everything, we haven't been a proper family. Harold, he would want us to stick together. He would want us to protect the house. It's the last piece of him we have left." This was their next move. The desperate counter-manipulation. When panic and accusation didn't work, they retreated to the old, reliable weapons: guilt, feigned remorse, and the invocation of my dead father's name. They were trying to pull me back into the familiar dynamic, to make me the fixer once more. "The house was my mother's too," I said, the words tasting like rust. It was the first time I had ever said that to her. There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Well, yes, of course, dear. But," she stammered, caught off guard. "But Harold built it, and he wanted Megan to have it. We just need your help to make this go away. You know the people at the city. You can tell them it's a mistake. Call that lawyer Mr. Carmichael, and tell him we're not interested. Tell him we'll sue him for harassment." Her voice was starting to lose its syrupy coating, the sharp edges of her desperation breaking through. They didn't want a family. They wanted a tool. They wanted the boring, responsible daughter to clean up a mess they couldn't comprehend. It was time to end it. "I can't do that, Diane," I said, my voice calm and even. "What do you mean you can't? Of course you can. This is your job." "My job," I said, savoring the words, "is to interpret and enforce the city's zoning code. And the code is very, very clear. The document is authentic. The zoning is commercial. There is no mistake." "What are you saying?" she whispered, the fake sweetness gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. "I'm saying," I replied, a strange sense of peace settling over me, "that you should probably take the coffee company's offer. It's the best one you're ever going to get." I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the sound of her world tilting on its axis. The power had shifted. The board had been flipped. The decorator had just discovered that the builder had designed the house with a secret demolition switch, and I was the only one with my finger on the button. The silence on the other end of the line was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The confrontation I knew was coming happened 2 days later. It wasn't a phone call. They showed up at my apartment, unannounced, on a Saturday morning. I saw them through the peephole. Diane, her face a thunderous mask of fury, and Megan, red-eyed and blotchy, her influencer-perfect composure completely shattered. They looked like a pair of shipwreck survivors. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my sweater, and opened the door. "We need to talk," Diane snapped, pushing past me into my small living room. Megan trailed behind her like a sullen ghost. "I don't think we have anything left to talk about," I said, closing the door quietly. "Don't you dare play dumb with us, Brooke." Diane spat, whirling around to face me. Her eyes scanned my neat, orderly apartment with contempt. "This is all you're doing. That coffee company, that lawyer, they only knew about that stupid paper because of you. You did this to us, to your own family." "My family?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Is that what we are, a family? Because families don't mock each other's careers. Families don't turn a shared legacy into a cheap marketing gimmick. Families don't leave one daughter a cherished home and the other a box of junk." Megan flinched at the word, her eyes welling up with fresh tears. "I didn't know," she mumbled, wringing her hands. "I never would have. I thought it was just old stuff." "Of course you didn't know," I said, my gaze fixed on her. "You never looked. You never once asked about Dad's work, about what mattered to him. You just saw a pretty backdrop for your videos, a prop, just like you saw him as a prop for your sad hospital selfies." That hit its mark. Megan let out a choked sob and buried her face in her hands. Diane, however, was made of sterner stuff. Megan, however, was made of sterner stuff. She stepped forward, her finger jabbing the air in front of my face. "You are a cruel, jealous little girl," she hissed. "You couldn't stand that Harold loved Megan, that he saw her light. So you decided to burn it all down just to spite us. He would be so ashamed of you." I didn't flinch. Her words, which once would have gutted me, now felt like pebbles thrown against a brick wall. "No," I said, my voice as hard and flat as slate. "He would be ashamed of you. You want to talk about his legacy. His legacy is in that box. It's the proof that he was smarter than you, that he paid attention to the details you always found so tedious. That variance wasn't a mistake. It was a foundation, and you were about to build a house of cards on it. You have to fix this," Megan pleaded, looking up at me, her face a mess of tears and desperation. "Call them. Tell them we won't sell. Make them go away." "I can't," I said simply. "And you don't want me to. Do you have any idea what it means for that property to be zoned commercial?" They just stared at me blankly. Of course they didn't. They had never bothered with the boring details. "It means that the city is going to reassess your property taxes," I explained, ticking the points off on my fingers, as if I were giving a presentation at work. "Instead of paying $8,000 a year, you'll be paying close to $50,000. Can you afford that, Megan? With your unboxing videos? Can you, Diane?" Diane's face went pale. "It also means," I continued, pressing my advantage, "that the Historic Committee has oversight on any exterior changes. You wanted to paint the house millennial pink and put up a giant neon sign for your Vibe Villa. They would have denied your permit. You wanted to cut down Dad's maple tree for a hot tub. Denied. You wanted to replace the original windows for better selfie lighting. Denied, denied, denied." I let the new reality sink in. Their dream was not just being threatened. It was impossible. It had always been impossible. They were just too arrogant and ignorant to see it. "The house, as a residence, is worthless to you now," I said, delivering the final blow. "It's a financial black hole. You can't afford to keep it, and you can't sell it to another family because who would buy a house with a $50,000 tax bill? The Daily Grind's offer isn't an insult. It's a miracle. It's the only life raft you have." Diane stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The fury had been extinguished, replaced by the cold, stark terror of comprehension. She finally understood. She had been outmaneuvered, defeated by a world she had always disdained. "You knew," she whispered, her voice cracking. "When you took that box, you knew what was in it." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I didn't. I just did something you and Megan have never done." I looked inside. I read the documents. I walked over to my bookshelf and picked up a single framed photo. It was of me and my father, taken years ago, standing proudly in front of that maple tree we had planted. "You called my career boring, Diane," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "You said that box was a fitting tribute. You were right. It was. Because my boring career taught me how to read the maps. It taught me that power isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about understanding the rules better than anyone else." I looked from Diane's horrified face to Megan's devastated one. "The house is yours. The decision is yours. Sell it, or don't. But my role as the family fixer is over. You're on your own now." I opened the front door and held it for them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They were trapped, not by me, but by the inescapable consequences of their own choices. Finally, Diane, looking suddenly old and defeated, walked stiffly out the door without another word. Megan followed, refusing to meet my eyes. As I closed the door behind them, a profound silence filled my apartment. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. The war was over, and I had won. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a sleek, minimalist coffee shop, the air filled with the rich aroma of dark roast and the quiet hum of people working on laptops. It's a daily grind. It stands on the corner of Chestnut Lane, right where my childhood home used to be. The old Victorian is gone, replaced by this structure of glass and steel and reclaimed wood. They even kept the old maple tree, its sprawling branches now providing shade for a bustling outdoor patio. The historic committee had insisted on it. It was, the architect had argued, a contextually appropriate nod to the site's history. Diane and Megan took the offer. Of course they did. It was their only way out. From what I've heard through the grapevine, Diane used her share to move to a retirement community in Florida, where she complains incessantly to her new friends about her ungrateful stepdaughter. Megan, after a long and dramatic social media hiatus, re-emerged as a wellness guru. She'd used her part of the money to go on a 6-week spiritual journey to Bali, and now sells online courses about letting go of toxic attachments and manifesting abundance. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. They never speak to me. The feeling is mutual. Did I go too far? Maybe. I see people commenting online, debating it. Some say I was a hero, that I delivered a perfect dose of karmic justice. Others say I was cruel, that I destroyed my father's house out of spite, that I should have found a different way. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they're right. I could have just told Diane and Megan about the variance. I could have used it as leverage to force them to respect the property, to stop the vibe villa without bringing in the wrecking ball. But that would have just been another negotiation, another round of me being the responsible fixer, managing their emotions and cleaning up their mess. It would have been a compromise, and I was done with compromises. The truth is, it wasn't about revenge until it was. It started as a desperate act of preservation, a way to protect the last piece of my parents I had left. But when they came at me with the same old weapons of guilt and manipulation, it became something else. It became a choice. I could either continue to play the part they had written for me, the boring, reliable, invisible daughter, or I could burn the whole script. I chose to burn it. I didn't get the house. I didn't get an apology. But I got something more valuable. I got peace. I got freedom from the endless cycle of their drama and demands. I took the label they gave me, boring, and I turned it into a superpower. They thought the game was about being loud and bright and seen. They never realized the real game was being played in the dusty archives and the fine print. They were playing checkers while I was playing chess. I take another sip of my coffee. It's surprisingly good. I look out the large plate glass window at the old maple tree. My father told me that planting a tree was an act of faith, a legacy for the future. He was right. He left a legacy, just not the one he intended. He left a legacy of resilience, of quiet strength. He left me a dusty old box, and inside he left me the key to my own liberation. And for that, I am truly, profoundly grateful. So I want to ask you, have you ever been the boring one in your family? The one who is always responsible, always taken for granted? They might underestimate you. They might overlook you, but never forget that while they're busy decorating the world, you're the one who understands how it's built, and that is a power they will never understand. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever felt this way, or if you have a story of your own about family drama and getting the last laugh, I'd love to read about it in the comments below. It's good to know you're not alone. And if you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about getting the justice you deserve. It really helps the channel out. We'll see you in the next one.